Just a second, and this video will speak loudly. There will be points where you'll laugh. Go ahead and laugh. There'll be points where you throw up your hands and say, I didn't know that. Go ahead. What you're going to begin to see is that there's a difference between success and significance, and you're going to see that. Watch this video if you would.
I've been held in your hands from the moment that I wake up until I lay my head. Oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. And all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so good. With every breath that I am able, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. I love your voice. You will lead me through the fire, and in darkest night you were close like no other. I've known you as a father, I've known you as a friend, and I have lived in the goodness of God. Yeah. And all my life you have been faithful. Oh, and all my life you have been so good. With every breath that I am able, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. Yeah. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. With my life laid down, I'm surrendered now. I give you everything. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. And all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so good. With every breath that I am able, oh, I'm gonna sing of the goodness of God. I'm gonna sing, I'm gonna sing. 'Cause all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so good. With every breath that I am able, oh, I'm gonna sing of the goodness of God. Oh, I'm gonna sing of the goodness of God.
Awesome.
All throughout my history, your faithfulness has walked beside me. The winter storms made way for spring. In every season, from where I'm standing, I see the evidence of your
Jesus in the streets, Jesus in the darkness over every enemy, and Jesus for my family. I speak the holy name, Jesus. I just want to speak the name of Jesus over every heart and every mind, 'cause I know there is peace within your presence. I speak Jesus.
Didn't the early years remind you a little bit of the Partridge Family when you saw all those people standing together? Tom's daughter, Linda, is going to come and open in prayer for us today.
Before I pray, I just want to thank everybody for taking the time to come and celebrate with us. You know, there's a lot of things that you could have done with your time today, but you chose to be with us, and so it means so much to us and to all of my family. You know, it's a wonderful thing to be able to celebrate my dad's life. He was such a good man, and this earth needs more people like my dad. So I hope that we can take a piece of him forward when we leave here today. But it's also wonderful to be able to celebrate that he has truly transitioned to another part of his eternal life. He is in the presence of the Lord. He has left his failing body, and his body was really failing. He lived 93 years. He lived a good 93 years. But his body was failing, and he now has a glorious body, and he's in the presence of the Lord, and there is truly no better place that anyone could be. And in a certain way, I am envious. In a good way, I'm envious of him because he truly is in a wonderful place. Let's pray together. Father, I just thank you for everyone in this room that was created by you in a beautiful, glorious way, so unique, so perfect in your eyes. And I pray a blessing on them in Jesus' name. And Jesus, we ask that you would just come and be with us today. We know that you are here, and we pray that you would be glorified in all that is said and that is done. In the power and the beauty of your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Awesome. Tom's daughter, Eve Pollard, is going to come and read the obituary for us today.
Thank you, everybody, for coming to support us and to honor my dad. Dr. Tom Earl Pollard passed away in Baldwin, Missouri on July 15, 2023, with his loving wife of 70 years, Barbara, at his side. He was born at home in Wayne County, Illinois, on September 22, 1929, to Charlie and Zella Pollard. They preceded Tom in death, as did his 5 brothers, Ray, Raleigh, Harry, Lou, and Chuck, and his sister Pat Andrus, and his grandson Vincent Cascella. Tom is survived by his wife Barbara, his 3 children, Linda, Phil Stern of Baldwin, Missouri, Mark, Nan of Harrison, Tennessee, and Eve Cascella of St. Louis, Missouri, 15 of his 16 grandchildren and their families, and many nieces and nephews and their families. Tom grew up on a farm in southern Illinois, rode a horse to school, a one-room schoolhouse, and graduated from Carmi Township High School in 1948. He was a talented athlete and excelled in many sports, including track, basketball, and football. He was a high school letterman in all 3 of those sports and was the quarterback on the football team. And not to mention, he was the valedictorian of his class. Barbara and Tom met as undergrads at the University of Illinois. Tom helped put himself through college and medical school by being a sulky driver in the Midwestern harness races. He and a horse named Dr. Cooper had their moment in spotlight when they set a record in Maywood Park in 1951. Though he quit driving to finish medical school and become a doctor, Tom was passionate about harness racing for the rest of his life, and he owned shares in many horses over the years. After their marriage, he and Barbara lived in Chicago, where Tom completed his medical residency at Cook County Hospital. There are many stories about that, by the way. In 1958, after serving a 3-year commitment to the U.S. Army Medical Corps at Fort Ord, California, where Linda was born, Tom and Barbara moved to Danville, Illinois at the request of medical school pal Dr. Bill Hensold. Tom would practice family medicine there for nearly 35 years, delivering hundreds, if not thousands, of Danville residents into the world in the process. Tom's commitment to love and provide for his family was a driving force in his life. In addition, he was a devoted follower of Christ and a longtime active member of the Rock Church in Danville, Illinois. He was an active and involved supporter of several charities and organizations, including Project Concern, the JCs, and the Women's Care Clinic. Tom was highly competitive and loved playing tennis and racquetball. He was also an avid fisherman, especially with his grandchildren, and he kept a very respectable vegetable garden. Dr. Pollard's remains were laid to rest beneath a shade tree at Atherton Cemetery on Perrysville Road in Danville, Illinois. Our family is deeply grateful to the staff here at Merrimack Bluffs for the loving care Tom received during the last year of his life. Thank you.
Thank you, Eve. Tom Pollard desired that he would have a life of worship, that he would remember himself as a person of God's presence. And so with that in mind, we're going to invite you to join us as we worship a little bit this morning. There's a team coming led by grandson Jim Stern. And you're encouraged to grab that paper that you received when you came in, that little bulletin, and to open it up to that song, 10,000 Reasons.
His holy name.
That's been passed down from one generation to the next and landed in you.
Oh, yeah, all of us.
The chorus of that song, Bless the Lord, O my soul, is the key to your granddad's life. Why he was blessed is because he chose to bless the Lord. And if we choose to bless the Lord, we'll be blessed as well. I wonder if we could just do the chorus one more time. Would you mind doing that for us?
Yeah.
Bless the Lord, O my soul.
Bless the Lord, oh my soul.
Like never before, oh my soul, worship your holy name. Thank you, thank you, thank you for reminding us about what Tom's doing right now in heaven around the throne of God, blessing the Lord. Barb, I promised the church in Danville that every time I saw you, I'd give you a hug from him. So I'm going to do that right now again, all right? I have to keep my word.
I send them my hugs.
Okay. Great. You know, most people have this idea of Tom of being a mild-mannered person. Not me. Anytime Tom had a racket in his hand, he turned into a different person. Whether it was a tennis racket or a racquetball racket, even a badminton racket. I saw Tom competitive with a badminton racket before. It was so amazing. He invented a new game called MPR tennis, which is Make the Pastor Run Tennis. He thought it was his responsibility to make sure that I got my exercise every week. And I found that to be very interesting. One time, whenever he would beat me, he would come up during our greeting time at church and he would tell Bonnie how he beat me. So during the greeting time, he would come up and shake her hand and say, "Did Randy tell you?" And Bonnie would always say, "Tell me what?" "Tell you that I beat him playing racquetball the other day." And one time someone overheard us. A person that got saved that Sunday morning before communion heard us and asked if he could come and play racquetball with us. So he showed up to the racquetball court and he was already there before we got there. But what happened was Tom asked him if he had a racket and he said, "Oh yes." But when we opened the door to go in and play racquetball with him, he had a tennis racket. The ball travels at 3 to 4 times the speed when you hit it with the tennis racket. So on one of my serves, sure enough, I got hit by that high velocity ball right in the middle of the back. Tom had warned the man and told him he needed to be careful because the ball travels a lot faster, but I got hit. I mean, took the wind right out of me. Tom said, "Let's take a break and get a drink." And so we went to get a drink and came back in. And Tom automatically said, the person's name was Gary. He said, "Gary, it's your turn to serve now." Gary served. Tom stepped up to hit the ball and hit him right in the calf with that racquetball. And he dropped to one knee and he stood back up and he said, "Man, that hurts." He said, Gary said, "Well, it's time for me to leave now. I have to go get ready for work." And so he left the game early. Afterwards, I asked Tom, "Tom, did you do that on purpose?" I asked Tom quite a few questions that he never gave me the straight answer to. He gave me these roundabout answers, clear out in random land, right? And what was so amazing was he said, "Randy, all I can say is I got your back." From that day on, he wasn't just a churchgoer to me, he was a friend to me. A good friend to me, who taught me about a journey from living a good life to being a man that God could use. And for just a minute, I want to share with you a few thoughts that Tom taught me that I'm sure he's taught many of you the same thing, of what it takes to make the progress from a life well lived to a life that God used to bring glory and honor to his name. Hebrews 12 tells us this: since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses. Did you know that Tom is in that cloud of witnesses right now? He has joined that cloud of witnesses that is cheering us on from heaven. You can do this. We can be together again. We're going to see each other again. I left the door wide open. We're going to get the opportunity to spend eternity together because of the life that I live. You too can be together, and the family can be together, and friends can see each other again. Let us throw off everything that hinders us and the weight that entangles us, and let us run with race, the perseverance that is marked out for us. Let's run that race. I have fought the good fight. I finished my race, and I kept the faith. Finally, there's laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, is giving me on that day, and not only to me, but to all who love him at his appearing. The journey from being a person that lives a good life to a life that God uses starts out pretty simple. Be a friend to someone that can't pay you back. This is what I learned from Tom. I watched him as he and Barb responded to the needs of a single mom with 3 kids named Amber, whose husband walked out on her and didn't have any transportation left to get to work. I watched with Justin, who had struggled with addictions his entire adult life and had a father who rejected him. And Tom said, I've got some work I'd like for you to do for me out at the farm. I watched with Keith, who was a life that was in trouble and headed down a downward spiral, and Tom made a decision. I believe there's something there that matters to God. I believe with all of my heart that what is so important for us to understand is this: the person that God uses is a person that never looks for a payback. Number two, the person that God uses is a person who has learned how to transition from success to significance. The key to a great life, as Tom has showed me, is shifting from a focus on accumulating things to a contribution of investing in people. If you want to be used by God, people matter more than things do. The old saying, he who gathers the most toys wins, needs to be replaced with he who serves the most people prospers. Remember, happiness is the byproduct of a life that is spent adding value to others. This is true happiness. Not in what you have, but who am I going to add value to? I practiced this morning, this particular point. Tom was a person who was a good listener. Barb told me yesterday that she would go into the grocery store and she would see somebody there that would stop and say, you tell Dr. Pollard that there's never been a doctor like him in Danville. He was such a good listener. So this morning, Barb, I did that at breakfast at the hotel. I just looked around and listened to different conversations, and I saw a man standing by himself with a nervous look on his face and a graduation gown in his hand. He was graduation from Logan University today, and I heard him say, I'm from Grenada, and I don't know where my taxi is, and it's starting to make me nervous. So I stood up and walked over to him after listening and asked him if I could pray with him. Did that in honor of what Tom taught me. Be a good listener. And he said, I would appreciate that so much. I'm such a nervous wreck, and I really need to get to my graduation. My family is so looking forward to seeing me graduate from Grenada. So I got to pray for him. Got to talk to him about Jesus for a few minutes. And as soon as we finished praying, his taxi came. Got the big grin on his face, was so happy for the prayer. And as he left, I said this: remember, God answers prayer. Just curious, how many of you have seen God answer prayer before? Look at that. That's amazing. The third thing that Tom taught me about that journey from a life well lived to a life that God uses is this: start with what you have. Start with what's in your hand. Sometimes it was finances from Tom. Sometimes it was tomatoes. Sometimes it was cucumbers from the garden. And sometimes it was even beets. I don't like beets very much. My wife does, so that's why we got beets for. Moses was asked this by God. When life was pushing him down and pushing him around and he didn't know how things were going to turn out, Moses was asked by God this: Moses, what's in your hand? And Moses said, a staff. And God said, use it and you'll see a miracle. The person used by God recognizes they don't have to be the richest, they don't have to be the wealthiest, they don't have to have all kinds of money in the bank. They just have to be willing to use whatever God puts in their hand for His glory. And that brings me to my next point. Tom was a man who was very careful about who got the glory for anything that he did. Whenever he and Barb decided that they wanted to help someone, the first words out of their mouth, always, without fail, was, now we do not want anybody to know what we're doing. We want God to get the glory. If you want to be used by God, that's the attitude that you have to have. It's not about me. It's not for people to see me, notice me, talk about me. It's about what can I do to bring glory and honor to God. The last thing that I learned on this journey from Tom is this. It takes a commitment to family, but even more, it takes a commitment to doing things God's way. I love to go fishing out at Tom's farm and out at the pond, and one day I noticed that there was another man out there fishing, and he had a big fish basket with him, bigger than anything I've ever seen before. And he would catch fish and throw the little ones back and keep the big ones and put them in the basket. And then he left, and he came back 30 minutes later and did the same thing all over again. After 2 or 3 times, I beelined it to Tom's back door, knocked on the door till he came to the door, and I said, Tom, this man has taken all of your biggest fish. Here he came back again, filled the basket. Tom walked outside. I followed him. They were walking to the car that this man had, and I said, this is going to be great. I'm going to get to see. He's going to have to put all those fish back, and I'm going to get to catch some of these big fish. I'm going to be watching to see where he puts them back at. This is going to be a good day for Randy. And then I heard Tom say this. Just remember, we don't allow any fishing with live minnows here at the farm. What? You're not going to chew him out? You're not going to make him put the fish back? Turns out he had a neighbor that was starting his own pond, and Tom was happy to see his neighbor starting his own pond and was happy that he was using some fish from Tom's pond to get his pond started. Shocking to me. Tom was committed to doing the right thing and doing things God's way. You want to be used by God? There's a commitment that you have to make. Not a commitment to believe that God is real, not a commitment to believe that heaven is real and hell is real, but a commitment to surrender your life to God's will. See, even Charles Darwin himself, in his first published work, said, I am convinced that somewhere, somehow, there must be a creator. What it takes is a desire to surrender my will to the will of God. I hope you make that decision today before you walk out these doors. I hope you say, I choose to be a man that God can use, a woman God can use, a teenager God can use. I choose to be a person that God can use for His glory, like Tom. I hope that that happens for you. I want to see that happen. We're going to have an opportunity to do something else today. Tom's name means one who is divinely protected. And the name Earl means noble person, but the spiritual meaning of the word Earl means one who reflects the likeness of God. So we have Thomas, divinely protected, and Earl, which means one who reflects the likeness of God. I'm going to ask you to vote with me for 1 minute. How many of you say, I know Tom well enough to say, I believe he lived up to his name? Let me see your hands. Just hold them high and wave at me and say, I believe he lived up to his name. Great. Well, someone who's going to share that knew his dad very well is his son, Mark. Mark, come on out. This one right here, yep.
Yeah, see if it's on. Hello, hello. Yes. So, thanks again, everybody, for coming. And I apologize. I talk to people all the time, but 1 or 2 or 3 at a time. But I get kind of emotional, and I'm not great in front of a big crowd, so I consider y'all a big crowd. But anyway, we're going to have an open mic microphone, and I get to start, I guess. So the truth is that I would love to hear from as many of y'all as would tell something about Dad. You know, he was a really good guy. Anyway, so if, yeah, thank you. So the plan is that my plan is that I wish whoever would, well, I want y'all to think about my dad. And I want you to think about what you remember about him, hopefully good. And I'd like y'all to start lining up over here to follow me. And I'm not going to stay here very long. As you can see, I shouldn't. But if y'all could come up here and be in a line, and whether it be, I'll say, oh, my husband, you know, Tom was this, or my dad was like this, or my grandpa was like that, or my great-grandfather was like that. I appreciate that. And anyway, we have about an hour or so, and if we can take that whole hour, maybe Dad is up there cheering us on and would love to hear what he meant to you. So,
I have a video clip for you. Then we'll
anyway, I do apologize. This is the way I get. And there are tissues here. It's funny. It really is funny. I do this every time. I wish I could put it on, make a really good comedy thing. So anyway, Dad was great to me. He was a real blessing to me. He was kind to me. He gave me the ability to go through school and end up with no debt coming out of medical school. You know, he blessed me in lots of ways. Physically, from an education standpoint, he taught me to throw a baseball and throw a football and to use my abilities to glorify God. And so anyway, he was a wonderful dad. And I got to see him up until about 24 hours before he died. And I was really thankful that God made it possible for me to be there for the last few days of his life. And anyway, that's all I need to say. I said, I'm not good. So anyway, next it looks like my sister Linda, so here's the mic.
Mark, you did a great job, except you make me cry. So we're not much of a crying family, so for all of us to be teary-eyed, it's a good thing. Healthy people cry, right? You're a doctor, you ought to know. I do the same thing. Well, I found out that there's a lot to learn in life from people that have gone before you. And many people leave a mark on your life, and my dad left a mark on my life. I am forever different because of the influence that Dad had on my life. And I have notes so that I will be brief. I call him an undercover servant. I think that Randy articulated some of his experience with my dad. I saw him to unselfishly put the needs of others above himself. He had no need for recognition or notoriety. He was a humble man who loved to help people. And he helped people all of his life that I knew him. Obviously, he was a doctor involved in so many different organizations. But in my dad's 70s, I want to jump to his 70s, when he and my mom came to visit us, he was always asking what he could do to help us. And I remember one time he showed up with a chainsaw. We had some big storms roll through St. Louis, and our yard was full of debris, and my dad showed up with a chainsaw in his 70s. And you know, in your 70s, none of us want to do that kind of work. And there were no jobs that my dad was above no job. So he showed up with a chainsaw, grabbed our rake and garbage bags, and cleaned our yard up. And it took a couple days, and it was a lot of work. But that's the type of man that my dad was. When we moved from Danville, Illinois to St. Louis, Missouri, 7 of our kids were financially dependent on us, so we had the stuff of 9 people. And my dad showed up early and stayed late. We filled a whole semi-truck, top to bottom, front to back, a lot of work. And the amazing thing is 3 months later, when we unloaded that semi, my dad was there in St. Louis with us, unloading. He was the first there, he was the last to leave, never complained about a pain in his body or the temperature or anything, because my dad was just there to serve. Wherever he could help, he was always willing to help. I'd like to jump to his 90s because that was when he was living here in St. Louis, and I had the opportunity to spend a lot more time with him. And there were a few days when my mom was in the hospital last year, and I had the opportunity to be with him, not 24 hours a day. My husband was there part of the time, but we were just with him a lot. He needed to be tucked into bed at night, and he needed help getting out of bed. He couldn't make his own food, but he also didn't have any short-term memory. So whatever my dad was thinking about, you knew what he was thinking about, because he mentioned it over and over and over, probably every 3 minutes. Some of you are nodding your head, you know. And my dad never uttered a concern about himself. In all those days that I cared for him, he was concerned about my mom, he was concerned about me. Over and over again, he was talking about those things, but he never once, and you know, when you get to that place in life, the true you comes out. Mm-hmm. It's visible for everybody to see. What's been going on in your heart and your mind is out there for everybody to see, and I saw the beauty of my dad at that time. Father's Day this year, when I celebrated Father's Day with my dad, as he always did before I left, he said, "Honey, is there anything I can do for you?" And you know, in the state that he was in, he couldn't do anything to help me, but his heart to help was still there. And as I always said, I said, "Dad, the best thing that you can do for me is to take good care of yourself." And he said, "Honey, remember, if there's anything I can do for you, just let me know." So in conclusion,
yeah.
I would, and where is Randy?
I'm right here. We're ready for you.
Oh, okay. I'm getting ready to conclude. My daughter, Chrissy, caught a beautiful video of my dad at his 90th birthday party. And remember, this party was to celebrate him. It was to focus on him. And he was asked to come up and just give some closing remarks. And I'd just like for you to help to make this world a better place and take a piece of my dad forward with you.
All right. Turn it up as we get started. Let's go ahead and play that and turn it up.
Thanks a lot for your being here, and appreciate each and every one of you. Anything I can do for you, just let me know. God bless you.
You did say that a lot, so. Anyway, next is.
For those of you who don't know me, I'm Eve. I'm the youngest one. And, Linda said a lot of it, so I won't repeat it, but I called him Pop. He called me Eve, but when I was little, he called me Boop Boop, or Evie Boop, kind of like after Betty Boop. But I haven't heard that in a long time, I have to say, right, Mom? I just want to say a couple of things that I remember about Dad. One was when my kids were very small, and we lived in Wisconsin, we lived in a walkout ranch-style house that had a wood-shake roof. And one day, Mom and Dad were visiting, and we were all out back burning leaves. And we were down low in the yard, and Gina, who was like 3 at the time, said, "My house is burning." And we all kind of ignored her, and then she said it again, "My house is burning." And so Dad turned around, and then we all turned around, and sure enough, the roof was on fire because some of the embers had flown up there and caught the wood shake. And you should have seen our dad. It's, you know, he might have been in his 70s then, or he might have been in his 60s. I would have to figure it out. But he went zooming up the yard. He jumped up on the deck. He grabbed the hose. He jumped up on the deck rail, and he jumped up on the roof from the deck rail with the hose and put it out. And, you know, that's kind of impressive, and it's a story that I remember. Another thing that I remember is we were in Tulsa together for Chrissy's wedding, and we were killing time in a park. It was Mom, Dad, me, Mark, I don't know, some people. And we were all in the park, and we sat down to take a rest. And this group of lovely young ladies came up, And one of them was wearing the sash that said the bride, and she had on a tiara and a little bridal veil. And she walked right up to Dad and she said, "Will you dance with me?" And he stood right up, and one of the girls took out her phone and played some music, and they danced around right there in the park, which was so sweet. That was one of the pictures. It was up there. Who is that girl? So that was one thing about my dad. He was pretty, kept himself pretty close to the vest. He wasn't the life of the party kind of guy, but I could always get him to dance with me. If I ever asked, he never said no. And that's really sweet. Another thing that you guys, nobody said this, but whenever we were little and we weren't behaving well, he would always threaten us with a good swift kick. Do you remember that? I don't ever remember him following through with the good swift kick, but the threat was always there. Anyway, I think that's pretty much all I have to say. So. Thanks again, everybody, for coming. We really appreciate it. I really appreciate it.
Don't forget your phone. Thank you. Please.
Thank you all for being here today. My name is Dave Pollard.
Hey, another living Pollard.
My Uncle Tom was the youngest of 6 stair-step boys, as you heard earlier, and Ray is my father. Ray is my father, the oldest son. And so there's always kind of something special about that. I didn't quite pick up on it, but there was something special about Dad being the oldest and Uncle Tom being the youngest. I'm never quite sure. But I have 3 instances I want to share with you in regard to Uncle Tom. And they are 3 distinct instances, but I can never speak of my Uncle Tom without also mentioning my Aunt Barb. She is the common thread of what I'm about to tell you. All 3 instances involved Sunday dinners in Danville, and these went on all the time from my early formative years up into my adult years. So, and all those 3 instances I'm going to be talking about are in regard to sutures, contamination, and diagnosis. Now, these Sunday dinners were special. My Aunt Barb, not only delicious meals, but you have to know her. They were always prepared with love and sincerity. There's no more sincere person on planet Earth than my Aunt Barb. If she tells you something, she's got strong reason to believe it's true, or she ain't gonna be telling you. So we'll go to that first Sunday dinner. My age, as best I can remember, is about between 10 and 12 years old. Not the first time they were there, but this particular instance. Aunt Barb was preparing the meal, and I say we, it was usually my father, Ray, my mother, Jane, and my sister, Nancy, and I. Over time, that mix changed a little. But this time, it was us 4. The phone rang. My Uncle Tom answered it. I could tell just by the gist of the language, he was talking to a patient. And I remember hearing him say something to the effect about meeting him at the office. So he hung up that phone, and he said to me, "Dave," he says, "I'm going to. There's a small boy, and his parents have called, and there is a significant, it sounds like a significant laceration, and it might need sutures." Now, even at my young age, I picked up on what, ooh, sutures. Hey, I'm there, we're ready to go. So off we went, and while we were traveling, he said to me, "Now, one of the reasons I'm bringing you along is because I think this young boy would be calmer if a young person was there." So we pull up there, and sure enough, there are 2 people who appeared to be parents, and they were, and this small boy, about 5 or 6 years old, and we went into the office, and Uncle Tom carefully removed this makeshift bandage they had, and sure enough, it was going to need sutures. He prepared this wonderful area, of course, sterile, clean, everything fine. And this young boy and I were carrying on a small conversation. I don't even remember what it was, but there was something, and I was amazed that he seemed as brave as he did about all this. So I'm wanting to see those sutures. So I'm talking to the boy, and I'm looking at this, and we're not darning socks, folks. This is a suture, so the needle was curved, kind of like this. Makes sense, doesn't it? You go in one side of that laceration, you're going in up the other. So I'm wanting to give this boy attention, but I'm interested in those sutures. And I see that, and of course, anybody that knows Uncle Tom knows he's precise. We already heard about that, about the athletics and everything. Oh, yeah. Well, this is really going on great. But I kind of looked up out of the corner of my eye, and I look at Uncle Tom's expression. And of course, he was focused. But I saw calmness and compassion. Compassion for that little boy. You're not the only one. And that stayed with me all my life. The other situation is in regard to contamination. Well, by the way, we went back and had one of those lovely meals at Bar Pass, and we did have that lovely meal. This other one was another Sunday dinner in Danville. I was roughly, in my late 20s. And we had that lovely, loving meal, served with sincerity and love from Aunt Barb. And so one thing led to another, and conversation led to something about contamination. And of course, we talked about different kinds of antiseptics and what you do with them and all this and that and the other. But it finally got around to where Uncle Tom said, you know, for all these clever things that we do to ward off contamination, hand washing and keeping your hands away from your face are still among the very best things you can do to avoid contamination. Well, that stuck with me. That stuck with me a long time. I was pretty good at hand washing anyway. My mother and father saw to that. But that stayed with me, and we're going to wind this now up to nearly today, just last July. My lovely Deborah had promised her granddaughter Jasmine a trip after she graduated from Eastern Illinois University. Well, she graduated 2 or 3 years ago, but you know how it is trying to find the time and match things up. Well, they finally found time. And they went on that trip, and they enjoyed it, but started in Barcelona, Spain, and other things. And they come back, and they get to Philadelphia, where they need to fly to Chicago to finish up this trip. And there was someone that came in at the last instant and sat right between Deborah and another lady on the aisle who had no appreciation for contamination. His primary appreciation was staring off into space and plucking something from his chin with tweezers as he coughed and hacked and snotted, and no face mask, of course, not that it would do you any good. Within 72 hours of Deborah getting back home after that, she was ill. Oh, I've never seen her worse. Oh, she suffered. I'm telling you, it took her over 2 weeks to get over it. Right at the apex of this. Right at the apex, at the worst time, she's horrible. We happen to be, oh, by the way, the whole time, I'm thinking about that contamination, Uncle Tom said. It's a wonder I didn't wear out my hands. Trust me, I wash my hands. And everything else, from silverware to dinnerware to anything you can imagine, separate bathrooms, everything. I didn't want what she had. Right in the middle of this, she slowly gets up. We have a great room. There's a seating area. There's a kitchen area. There's a dining area. All in one big open floor plan. She gets up. She goes over to the kitchen area. She reaches up to that cupboard and opens that door and pulls out a bag of wheat germ. Wheat germ? as if things aren't contaminated enough. Oh, I was thinking, oh, what would Uncle Tom think of that? Oh my gosh. Now I've been watching you and I know you're counting. He's promised 3, and that's 2. One more. Okay. One more. It's about diagnosis. Now, I was roughly, between early to mid-30s. Another one of those lovely meals prepared with love and sincerity. We had had that lovely meal. They were living in the country, the nice home out in the country and the pond and all that. We were in that living room, and one thing led to another, and of course it involved horses. You saw the pictures and all that stuff. So it involved horses and people. Got to talking about injuries, illnesses, maladies, all kinds of things, you see, and of course treatments. Well, amongst all this, Uncle Tom, always contemplative if you know Uncle Tom, and he says, you know, it's less about treatment. It's more about diagnosis. If you can make the correct diagnosis, there's a strong chance there's more than one effective treatment. Well, now what I'm about to admit to you took 7 or 8 years. I did remember all that, and I thought of it. But it's about 7 or 8 years later, and I realized that Uncle Tom had given me the golden grail of life, and I wasn't smart enough to pick up on it for 7 or 8 years. It's not just about medicine. If we can diagnose what our difficulties are correctly, chances are there's more than one effective solution. So I thank you for your patience and your time, but mostly I thank my Uncle Tom and Aunt Barb. When I think of them, I always thought, you know, you get 2 for 1.
Thank you, Dave. Appreciate that.
Well, I'm Nancy, and not for the first time, my brother has stolen my thunder. But I have a couple of things I wanted to tell again about Aunt Barb as well as Uncle Tom. First time I saw them, I was about 4, and I thought they were the most beautiful people in the world. They were just so gorgeous, and I thought, oh, man, if I could just grow up and be like that, oh, that would be wonderful. But my favorite story about Uncle Tom, many of you know I'm the allergy queen of the world. And when I was a kid, just for no reason, suddenly I would wake up and my eyes would be swelled shut, or my lips would be turned inside out, and it was embarrassing, number one, and troubling, number 2. So one day with those wonderful Sunday meals where we were, I had had one of those incidences on Saturday, and it was not quite gone when we got to Uncle Tom's, and he looks at me and he says, "What on earth is the matter with you?" And I said, "Well, I don't know." So I was explaining to him that this happened and talking about the diagnosis and the fact that he's a wonderful diagnostician. He says, "Tell me some more about that." So I did. And he said, "Do you have a antihistamine that you could take every day?" And I said, "Well, I guess." I said, "I have one I take for my hay fever." And he said, "I think you have a chemical imbalance." And he says, "I think if you take an antihistamine every day, those will stop." Many, many, many years later, I have not had another of those incidences.
Oh, praise God for that. Amen. All right, the line is getting short, so everybody can come fill the line in if they'd like to. Anyway.
Hi, everyone. Well, for those who I haven't met, my name's Nick. Looks like I'm going to be kicking off some stories by the grandkids. So my primary connection with my grandfather was through sports and our shared love for competition. And so whenever we'd get together, I'd sharpen myself on the Fighting Illini, what are the headlines, where were they at in the standings, And he'd ask me about hockey and my training and tennis. And I always respected him for his physicality and athleticism. I'll never forget, Grandma and Grandpa were watching us kids when my parents were out of town one week. I was in high school, probably 16 or 17, which means he was pushing 70. And it was around this time I was starting to get pretty decent at tennis. And so Grandpa says, hey, we should go play. So we go to the MAC club next to Destiny Church, and I'm walking onto the court thinking to myself, like, I'm going to have to take it easy on this old guy. Like, I don't want him to get a heart attack, all right? He proceeds to spend the next hour absolutely crushing me at tennis, okay? He's all gracefully like, da-dunk, da-dunk, and I'm running around like a madman thinking to myself, like, is he even moving? Is he floating? His feet aren't even touching the ground. It was the most amazing thing. Last night I was driving home and I was asking myself this question. If there's one word that I could use to describe Grandpa, what would it be? And one kept coming to mind, and it's stoic. One who endures, one who demonstrates grittiness and resiliency in the face of life's hardships, a spirit who overcomes. And that's who Grandpa was. He was a cornerstone for his family, no question about it. A couple of years ago, I was in town and went and visited Grandma and Grandpa, and that was really, really tough to see him in the condition that he was in. It was almost as if I was facing my own mortality through him. And I was working out this morning, and a verse was placed on my heart that I'd like to share with you all. 2 Corinthians 4:16 through 18, it says, "So we do not lose heart. Though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. For this light momentary affliction is preparing us for an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison, as we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal." And it hit me this morning. My grandpa was not wasting away. He was being made new because he put his faith in the one true and real cornerstone, Jesus Christ. And our God isn't the God of the dead, but the living. And so that is exactly what he is doing right now, right? He is alive. He is free from diabetes and sickness and degeneration and memory loss. He is restored and renewed and alive in a way that we can't even begin to comprehend. And so all I'll say is this: when I get there with him, we are going to have the most epic tennis rematch, and this time I will be prepared.
Good luck.
I love you, Grandpa. Thank you for the strength that you demonstrated.
Also a grandson, Phil and Linda. My connection with him was not at all around sports ball. As we had kind of 3 touch points with our grandparents that I think really bolstered our relationship over the years. Were vacations in Florida, going to spend time with them in the spring. It must have been spring because it was during March Madness every year or a few years, primarily in the 90s. And them just showing up to our house. And to echo what Randy said, they showed up and served. The number one thing that I recall, and Graham, this is every bit as much to you, is everything you guys did. You showed up and you served. And as I've observed many, many more grandparent relationships with many other people, this is actually not primarily the case. Realizing how the reason we had such great connection with our grandparents on my mom's side was they showed up, they served. And what that does for a grandchild is just makes you want to be connected. He would always be super into the whatever the March Madness was. This is going on. Again, sports ball, could care less. However, he liked North Carolina, and that stuck with me. And when I filled out the bracket at company to fill out my own little tournament bracket and maybe win $500, I bet on North Carolina because my grandfather liked him, and sure enough, I won $500. Thank you, Grandpa. But among fun memories, he taught me to fish. My father is many great things, a fisherman, not one of them. So I did learn to fish. I'm teaching my children to fish in the ways of my grandfather, starting off with a cane pole. Got to learn them right. And it's translating down. He'd be proud to know that I'm eating more salad than I've ever eaten before. He would be proud to know that I walk several miles with my wife whenever the weather's nice. He would not be proud to know my tennis game has gone to complete trash. He'd be proud to know that we have a vegetable garden and apple trees. He would not be proud in that they produce very, very poor results. He would be proud that his 67 tractor is running awesome, primarily due to Jim. We now have a quarter-mile driveway that gets graded with that delightful tractor every once in a while. And he would also be proud to know that one of my favorite memories is when we would go on these trips to the summer to stay with him. He would put us to work because he was smart and generous. He's smart because here's these young strapping lads who are farm hands and willing to work, but he'd be generous and he'd pay us $10 an hour in the 90s, which was, you were rich, you were a king. But he'd put us to work doing things that he would never want to do, and if we were smart, we wouldn't want to do, like get on the roof of the barn and paint it with rollers in the hot sun for 8 hours. We were excited because we got to stand on the roof of a house. My mom probably didn't know about this till after the fact, or she probably wouldn't let it happen. But we did lots of great work, $10 an hour. The one job he did not pay me near enough was there's this pond with this overflow culvert that's very long. And apparently culverts last a lot longer if you paint the inside of the corrugated culverts. I was the only one dumb enough to volunteer for this one at $10 an hour. I realized this halfway through as every joint in my body is hurting and I'm only halfway through painting the inside of a corrugated culvert. And so, honestly, I stopped and slept for 30 minutes and then picked up and kept going. I still claimed the hourly wage on the nap. I earned it. But what would make him proud is I now have the gravel driveway and I have a culvert that goes under, and I'm just waiting for the moment I can sucker my own children into painting the inside for $10 an hour. It will be the highlight of my life. But thank you guys so much, and this is so much to Graham too, for showing up and serving. It's a model for all of us of what it looks like to pay forward to the next generation. When you guys are as successful as you are, you can do whatever you want, and every memory I have is you showing up to serve the next generation that could never pay you back. So thank you guys so much.
I'm going to keep this short. I'm the oldest granddaughter, and I was smashed between 6 boys in my family. So it was kind of me, myself, and I, and then the boys. And so we would go to Grandma and Grandpa's every summer for a few weeks and spend some time with them. And I remember Will getting in that pit and painting on the roof, and he didn't subject me to any of that. I got to weed the garden, cook and clean and do things like that. But I do remember Grandpa, whether it was on vacation or at the farm, he always took time aside for me to help me learn how to do little things. The boys kind of did their thing, then they're gone and they're watching TV or doing something else. And he always took time for me because I wasn't strong enough or big enough to play tennis, so he would go out on the court afterwards after he played with 3 boys and hit it around with me because I didn't hit it well, teach me how to clean fish and change out the stalls with the horses. And he never turned me down, right? So he'd be out with his little afternoon snack on the porch in the rocking chair, sometimes shooting the birds, just every once in a while. Only the bad birds, the blackbirds. And I'd come out and sit with him, and that could have been his alone time. He could have said, hey, it's my alone time, go away. But he would never turn me down, allow me to just come sit with him and ask him dumb questions, and talk about the birds and whatever was out and about. So I appreciated that. And I think most people that knew him knew that he also did have a very keen sense of humor. It only came out in short little flashes at times. But one of my favorite memories of last year, they lived here and I'm in town, so I have gotten to have dinners with them, which is one of my favorite things, getting to spend time with my grandparents. And one of the last times I remember having dinner with him, it was shortly after he had to have his walker, and he wasn't really happy about that. And so and he didn't understand that he didn't have to pay for things here. So he was always trying to grab his wallet because he always wanted to pay for everything, which I just thought was the most precious and endearing thing, because he wanted to make sure I was taken care of. He didn't want anyone else to pay for things. So anyway, we're walking out. I step into the hallway from their apartment. I'm against the wall. There's this nice painting I'm against. He's coming out of the door. I'm like, you all right, Grandpa? And he's coming straight at me with the walker, real slow. And then all of a sudden, he rams up and just rams straight into me with the walker, like right up against the wall. And I was like, oh, okay, you still got it. And he goes, let's go. Also, all that to say, his little senses of humor were still there even over the last few years, and it was just a beautiful thing to be able to see little glimpses of that, whether it was in conversation or just funny things that he did. And I just appreciated that he truly was patient with us as kids and even as adults, and just the little moments that he took to spend with us individually will always stick with me, and I hope that I can offer that to other people in my life as well. He also did a really cool disciplinary thing to this one over here. Very patient man, but this one pushed the buttons. He pushed the buttons a lot as a kid. And we were up there, and I think it was his first year at the farm with us, and Grandpa told him probably 20 times, if you disobey me one more time, I'm going to make you wear a life jacket the rest of this trip, 24/7, except for when you sleep, because that's dangerous. So sure enough, Michael disobeyed one more time, and we all got to watch Michael wear this big orange life jacket for about a week straight, every single day. I will never forget that. Brilliant.
Yes, discipline's a good thing. So anyway.
Hi, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm, I believe, the youngest granddaughter. Many of you know me by Chrissy. I'm also Christina. I'm both. I'm a lot like Uncle Mark in the way that I might start crying. So I'm just gonna, yeah, just in case. I have you on guard. All right. You know, being towards the tail end of the grandkids, I had a much different experience, and it was very special for me. The older I have, oh man, this is way too early. Ugh. The older I've gotten, the more I have understood and come to realize that nobody on this earth is self-made. We are byproducts of the many people in our lives, whether it's horrible experiences or wonderful. Nobody is self-made. We are all byproducts of our experiences and the lessons that we learn from other people. And growing up, I learned a lot of lessons from my grandfather. You know, similar to Will, he taught me how to fish. He put me on the horse, taught me how to ride when I was, 3 years old. I didn't know what I was doing, but for me, it was so special. And he taught me how to pick berries, helped me put them in my cereal in the morning. And I had so many wonderful memories as a child with my grandfather. Something that Faith mentioned that I was actually going to know was how patient he is. He would always take me out fishing. Even when I knew he didn't want to, I would beg and beg and beg, and he would finally cave and say, okay, fine, we'll go out for a little bit. And I would catch all these fish, and I was so excited, and then he'd say, all right, since you caught all these fish, it's time to go clean them. I would say, I'm not doing that. I'm not cleaning. You have to clean the fish. You caught them. No, I'm not touching those fish. And then he would finally cave and say, okay, I'll clean them. Little girl always got her way somehow. As I got older, I was not the most athletic person. Didn't really have much discipline in my diet. And he was the first person to always remind me of that. Every time he would visit or I would see him, the first thing he would ask was, what are you doing for exercise these days? And it was a running joke. I knew it was going to happen because I knew I wasn't healthy. And even though he asked every single time, I did not change anything about my life. It was just kind of funny, you know? But the older I got, the more I realized the value in living a healthy lifestyle. And I look back at his life and how incredible it really is that he lived to 93. You know, I believe, if my math is correct here, he was roughly 66 or 67 when I was born. So I really got to experience the tail end of his life. And I got to see firsthand, even though it had been so long since his diagnosis of diabetes, he lived such a healthy life for so many years. And he instilled in me the importance of that. And so I look at that, so grateful, because he did not have to put so much effort into asking me over and over again, what I was doing, what I was eating. I mean, like, sometimes it was overboard, people. And he did it anyway. And after so many years, it caught on. And it changed my life. And when you listen to all these stories of all the people he impacted, if he would have chosen to just live life how he wanted and not be active and healthy, he would have missed out on the opportunity to impact lives for decades. And I'm very grateful to be one of those people who, he impacted. So, there we go. Thanks, Grandpa.
Thank you.
My name is Mike. I am one of the Stern mob. And when our family was in transition from Danville to St. Louis in 2000, we had that summer, Grandma and Grandpa had graciously let our pile of 9 people crash their house for several months, which I'm sure was a bit of a jolt to the Pollard way of living. And one of the things that Grandpa asked me to do, and I was 12 years old at the time, and as my sister pointed out, I was not the most disciplined human being in the planet. He asked me to clean his pond over the course of the summer. Okay, now, Grandpa's pond loved growing scum all over it. So at this point in the summer, it was probably 2/3 water, 1/3 scum. And it's a fairly sizable pond. So like, I had some work ahead of me, and he didn't do it by hourly rate. He just said, this is what the job is worth. I will give you this money when the job is complete. And he gave me the whole summer to finish this thing, okay? I got maybe half the way through over the course of we were there 2 months, probably. That's sad, and it wasn't great. And he was very forthcoming with this. He said, you get the whole sum when the whole job is done. You're not getting halfway through. Well, I had a conversation with him at the end, and out of the graciousness of his heart, he decided to give me half the job, even though that was not at all what we had agreed on. So, points, Grandpa. Let's skip ahead about 5 years. I'm almost 18 years old. Me and my brother Phil are asked to come out and paint his fence, okay? Because the thing's falling apart. We had to do a couple parts where we actually fixed some of the fence and stuff like that. And I don't think you were in the room, Phil, but he sat down with me before we started. He said, now, this isn't going to turn out like 5 years ago, is it? I'm like, I was like, what are we talking about? He said, well, you didn't clean my pond. I'm like, yeah, we'll get it done. Now, fortunately, in this case, it wasn't a lump sum thing. This was an hourly rate thing, so we got as much done as we could in the time that we were there. And we actually did a pretty good job. I was pretty proud of it and all this stuff. But it really made me think about like one very specific thing. Any man in his right mind would not have rehired his grandson to come and do work on his farm again after the sad job I did. But it stuck with me, the amount of grace that he showed, not just because I was his grandson, but just as a human being. He extended grace to me and like expected more of me. And it continues to point back to even many of the stories that Randy was pointing out, and the slew of stories I'm sure you know. I mean, it's countless. He extended so much grace. And it's one of the most defining things about about who Jesus is, about who God is, the grace that he extends to us. And it's like the irreplaceable gift that it goes beyond words. And he just reflected that in just the most powerful way. The amount of grace he shows to people. So that's just like the thing that has stuck with me. It changed the way I conducted my own relationships with people. And it grew my capacity to have grace for people when they did not deserve it. Because we've all been hurt by people, and it's hard to do that. So it's just, there's something about a quiet, gracious person that is incredibly impactful on a person, and I really appreciate him for that.
All right, my name is Mark. I'm one of Phil Linda's kids. I'll keep it short and sweet. My grandfather, I think the thing that really impacted me the most about his life is he built something. He knew exactly what he wanted. I mean, he's like, I want a farm. He had this whole, he built something that he knew that this was going to make me successful in life. And this is what I want to do, is pour into my family. And I want to pour into people. But I also want to have a place where I can vent out and be competitive. Whatever that is, if that's fishing, if that's beating people in any other kind of sports, he knew what it was going to take for him to be healthy. And I think that's a big reason why he lived so long. And I think, you Graham as well, both of you have built a life that's just, we know what we want, and we want to invest in people. And we're going to lead that charge, and we're also going to be healthy for ourselves. And that's something that's meant so much to my life, and not just the physical part, but the mental part. And you guys, that takes effort. And that's just something that's impacted me in my life so much, and seeing how he's done that. And another thing too is he's such a competitor in all parts of life. And he's like the silent killer. Like even on the tennis court, that is literally him in a nutshell. And everything he did, he was a silent killer. And as my brother just said, Mike, he is so gracious and generous too. But I mean, he literally taught, I don't know if you know my family too much. We're not like the most athletic people, right? Like any part of athleticism comes from the Pollard gene. It doesn't come from the Stern gene. But he took these times. We'd go to Florida every single year, and he would teach us, because he's so passionate. When you think of passion, you think a loud, rah, 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 passionate. No, he is passionate, but he is patient, and he is kind. But also, guess what? And this is, I think there's a lot of godly characteristics that everybody's hit on, but there's the one that he was going to correct you. And I think that was one of his best characteristics, is he is going to correct you. And guess what? That always doesn't feel good. Sometimes it feels like a racquetball hitting the back of your shin, But that's what I just admire him so much, is he had so many godly characteristics. But the one I take is, hey, let's have fun. Let's be the best that we can be. Let's do this. But also let's do this the right way. I'm going to play to win. We're not here to lose, right? We're here to play to win. We're going to do this. And he carries that passion, and I don't know, he just impacted me so much in my life with that. And I think that's something we could all take away and be more of.
Hello, I'm Joy. I'm his sister, one of the Stern sisters. Actually, the third. Y'all said the oldest. I'm the middle Stern sister. Chrissy said it so well. We got to enjoy the later retired years of our grandparents' life. We're still enjoying being with you in your life. But Grandpa was such an inspiration, and there's so many stories that we never got to experience that our older siblings got to experience because they were in those younger years, And so, but we did get to share the life with them at holidays, and it was such a treasure because a lot of our friends growing up did not have their grandparents around anymore. And it was such a gift to have such generous, loving, compassionate, faithful grandparents with us all of our lives. And as I reflect on the life of my grandpa, Tom Pollard, I think he was such a strong and faithful man. and he exemplified the character of Christ in a way that everyone has said here was so patient and kind. And I was sitting there, and I felt like I was supposed to share something. I didn't know what. I don't have this overarching story of the experience, like one experience, but it's just the story of a man that was faithful to God. And that's what we all have experienced and touched in the life of Thomas Pollard, as a man who was faithful and generous and giving, even if he never got the credit. And one of the things that's always boggled my mind is why would he get the ending that he got that was difficult? And when I found out that he had passed away, I was actually living with my in-laws because we're moving, and anytime I experience a death with anybody, I'm always turned to this song by Mercy Me called I Can Only Imagine. I'm sure all of you have heard that song. Because when people pass on, it's like we get a touch of eternity. The questions come, where did they go? What happened? We look at their life, we celebrate their life. And I'll never forget sitting there listening to that song, surrounded by your glory, what will my heart feel? Will I dance for you, Jesus? In awe of you will I be still? And you shared the scripture. He's with Jesus, and he's celebrating. I'm sitting in the kitchen, and I'll never forget hearing God say to me, he's looking at me now, and he will never forget me. He will never forget me. And that was one of the hardest things at the end of his life, just being there talking, and someone said it, seeing him in that state of the conversations. And we can rejoice now. He is in the presence of God, eternity. The word says every tear will be wiped away. Every sorrow will be set aside because he is in the presence of the one who loves him. And that is what we've touched in him. We've touched the Creator. We've touched Jesus because he exemplified the life of Christ, not perfectly, but in so many ways. That's what I want to share.
So I thought about not coming up here because there'll be shreds of redundancy probably in what I say, but the man deserves some honor for the life that he lived. So I'm the third oldest of Linda. My name's Dan, and when I think about my life in the 40 years that I've lived on this earth, some of the peak moments, like they all get back to that farm, and they get back to that pond. You know, when you're a 6-year-old or 8-year-old, I don't know how old I was, but catching a 5-pound catfish on a cane pole, it was a 20-minute battle. It's like that. That's a formative moment there. And then, you know, to then go back to that same pond. Hey, Steve. To go back to that same pond, 30 years later, same people are there. Maybe the same dang fish are there. I don't know. To stand on those same banks and, to pull out 25 pounds in a matter of an hour and have the picture to prove it. Yeah, both pictures to prove it, actually. We got the catfish one, and then we have like the 25 pounds of bass. And it's just, from like a perspective standpoint, like those, I'm just convinced a lot of those experiences, they don't exist a lot. Nowadays, once again, come back married, life is so changed, but to have that opportunity to just experience those kind of basic things that maybe aren't in our lives as much as they need to be nowadays. I feel like I'm an 80-year-old man walking around in a grumpy 40-year-old man's body all the time. And some of that I say it and I feel like that, but it's because, I don't know, I just love my grandparents so much and the foundation that you all built. And I think one of the cool things about hearing everybody talk today is it's not just me. I'm not that only person that has all those things in them. Like, how can a sport have such an impact on a bunch of little kids? Well, it's because like your grandparents taught it to you, and you learned so much more than just how to move your wrist and how not to bend it and all that stuff. It's like life lessons through that. When I think through, fundamentals that are important to building strong families and being good parents. It's being financially responsible. It's being good to children. It's offering to help people. And it's like, this is the life the guy lived as long as I ever saw him alive. Just an absolute hero, absolute legend, a Renaissance man, not a one-trick pony, extraordinarily consistent, and it's just hard not to respect that. And carrying with him, like Graham, I've been carrying you all with me for a long time. Like, there were times before I had kids, where Christine and I would go up to the farm, and we'd spend a few days with you all. And to see Christine, my wife, like, pick that up and start to see like what I've lived with my whole life. Like, you changed her, like, in a matter of a couple years. And super important. The world absolutely needs more grandparents like you all. Yep.
My name's Phil. I'm one of Linda's kids. I'm right there in the middle somewhere. Thank you. Sorry. Pardon my coughing and sneezing, and I'm very sleep deprived and I'm congested, but I promise you I'm not contagious with anything. Dan said that there'd be redundancy, and it's kind of a given, especially with what I've heard in the time that I've been here. But one thing I wanted to touch on was, I think another piece of why Grandpa lived so long was his sense of humor. He just was so chill and so also just clever in the way he even just asked questions. One of my favorite questions he ever asked me was, I used to work for a company called Redbox, and my grandma and grandpa are asking me about what I'm doing, and I go, well, I work for this company called Redbox, and Grandpa goes, what is a Redbox? It's just the way he said it. There's kind of this like sarcasm behind it, like that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard of, which it is pretty dumb sounding. But that's just, I'm sure we all have, a moment in our mind where he would say something in that way. And I felt like he could say it about anything. And I love that because, how many people do you know that can ask a question about pretty much anything in this lighthearted tone and way? And I don't know, it's just the humor he had. It's a part of me. It's a part of a ton of my siblings and my cousins. Wholeheartedly, I think every one of my cousins are hilarious, and I'm not just saying that. And I think that Grandpa's a huge part of that, and obviously the son and the daughter and all that, but when I think of Grandpa, I almost always end up laughing. I'm always smiling. And, not a lot of my friends can say that about their grandpa or their grandma, which is really sad. But I can, and I think that we all can, and forever grateful for that. So, Mrs. Grandma.
All right. No?
They didn't say it, so I got to say it.
What?
Okay. Almost every one of the grandkids know what a Pollard punch is. Come on, am I right? Boy, when discipline didn't work, here it came, and boy, they went to their knees right away. The Pollard punch. It'll go down in history. I tell you what. You remember that, Nick, don't you? You probably got it a lot, didn't you? But I did want to say one thing, is that my first encounter with my father-in-law to be was when I asked him if I could marry Linda. It was the most deafening 10 minutes of silence when he sat there and just looked at me. I'll never forget that. And how are you going to support her? And when I said I was going into the ministry, there was another deafening 5 minutes of silence, because he was all about taking care of everybody. How are you going to take care of this? How are you going to do it? And I do remember another encounter, and I'm not sure I even ever shared this with you, Linda, but after we had 3 children, I know he was concerned that I didn't understand what was making this happen. And he always put his hand out there to shake my hand. He was always... it took me about 20 years to get a hug out of him. It was always the handshake. But on this particular kind, he had this sense of humor. He shook my hand, and in the other hand, he had a scalpel. And he said, "Have you figured it out yet, Phil?" So he had that great sense of humor, and I loved him for it. And his support, he always had your back. He was right in that, Randy. He always had your back. He was a great father-in-law. I wouldn't have picked another father-in-law other than Tom Pollard, and I thank him for all that he's deposited into all of his grandchildren. You can see it's there, and it's a story that'll go on forever and ever and ever. Thanks for coming.
Okay. Anybody else? All right, so we need to say, cut it off here. We have a couple more things going.
A masterpiece, a one-of-a-kind work of art, is what the Bible describes it as, which all of you are. A one-of-a-kind, unique masterpiece, each special in your own way. Tom was a masterpiece, a one-of-a-kind work of art, created in the image of God. What I've noticed is that when Jesus is Lord of your life, there is no generation gap. There is no separation of age groups. There is no separation of reach and difference that you can make and influence that you can have when Christ is the Lord of your life. I got a phone call once from Tom, and actually it was from Barb, saying that people were hunting on their property that shouldn't be there, and that Tom was getting ready to go out and set them straight.